All right, everyone may be seated. On the board, you see a bunch of names and things I want to explain to you. The witness is in the top left corner. The middle box is coming from this camera right here. Okay. The names of Henson and Callahan are observers to the testimony. They will not be saying anything. Lisa Morton's IP is Ms. Morton's cell phone, so she can hear well. And the last one is this thing right here. Okay, so just pay attention to the upper two where you see the video, and everything will be just fine. We'll dim the lights. If you would raise your right hand for me, please, ma'am. You solemnly swear or affirm testimony given this cause to be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay. Whose witness is this? Mr. Barrett, you may proceed.
Ms. Ferrara, I'm raising my hand out here if you can see me. You kind of have a bird's eye view of the courtroom, is that correct?
Correct.
There's a little bit of delay, so I'm going to ask a question and then give you time to answer. And if you do the same, that'd be great. Okay?
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I just want you to introduce yourself to the jury, state your name, and then I'll ask you some questions. If you spell your first and your last name, and if you've ever been known by another name, you can say that as well, spell your first and last name.
My name is Jacqueline Ferrara. It is spelled JACQUELINE FERRARA. My name during the time of my analysis for this case was Jacqueline Winston, and that is WINSTON.
Thank you. So, on this case, at the time, I'm going to say the date of December 2nd, February of 2023, would you have been known by Jacqueline Winston?
Correct.
And on that date, was there some items that were brought to the DPS Garland Crime Lab that were then taken out of the box, and the process of at least preparing those items for analysis, did you have a part in that?
Yes, I did. I have the lab submission forms with the items that were submitted for my analysis, and that was dated February 21st of 2023.
February 21st, 2023, and does it say the printed name of the person that delivered those items to the Garland DPS lab?
Yes, it says that it was Job Espinoza who dropped off the evidence.
Thank you. Now, I want to talk, before we go into what you did on the case, I want you to tell the jury about your background and your education that qualified you to be, to have the job at the DPS Garland Crime Lab that you had at that time.
I received my bachelor's of science degree in biological sciences and have fulfilled the completed coursework required by the FBI's quality assurance standards in order to be a forensic testing analyst. I am also licensed, or I was at the time of my employment, I was licensed by the Texas Forensic Science Commission as a licensed forensic biology screener. During my employment at the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab in Garland, I was employed from, it was November of 2020 to December of 2024. After my employment, I underwent a series of training modules in order to prepare myself to be a forensic biology screener and a DNA analyst.
And on this particular case, you said that you had a copy of the Garland lab submission, is that correct?
Yes, the submission form, correct.
And I'm gonna ask to approach Your Honor just so I can show him video.
Okay.
Ms. Ferrara, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purpose now as State's Exhibit number 297. That is a 1, 2, 3, 4-page document, three with the items listed, and then the original cover sheet. Oh, it's upside down?
Oh, there you go.
All right. So can you see that now? Is it upside down?
Yes, it's upside down for,
Okay, is it upside down now?
no, it's right side up.
Okay. I was trying to watch up there on the screen. So for you, is this a true and correct copy? Does it appear to be, from your perspective, of the document that you have in your possession, which is also a true and correct copy of the lab submission in this case?
It would appear that the first page looks similar to the document that I own that is also 4 pages.
And I would just ask if the defense would be willing to stipulate, based upon the pretrial hearings in December on this case, that this is one and the same document.
Your Honor, in the interest of judicial economy, I will stipulate these are the same documents. I trust Mr. Berry's position.
Thank you, Mr. Scoville, appreciate that.
Now, with regard to this case, before I sit down, I want to identify a couple of more documents. First of all, you issued 2 lab reports related to this case, is that correct?
Correct.
And the first one, I believe, was issued on March the 16th of 2023, and entitled the DNA Male Screening Laboratory Report. Is that right?
Correct.
And I'm going to show you what's now been marked as State's Exhibit number 298, and asking, at least as far as the front page, if that appears to be that same document.
It does.
And then next, I'm going to show you another lab report that was issued on June the 14th of 2023, entitled Biology Laboratory Report. And show you that's now been marked as State's Exhibit number 300. Can you see that?
Yes.
Does that appear to be the same as the one that you issued in this case as well?
Yes, it does.
Now, Ms. Ferrara, with regard to these items, before I offer them into evidence, I want to kind of talk about what you did in this case. Can you give just a brief, I'm going to let you talk as much as I can, to just tell us sort of the progression of the things that you did in this case. Let's just start with the first thing that you did in this case, once you were assigned to do your first lab report.
So my first lab report is this DNA male screening lab report. When I was first assigned to this case, I had retrieved the evidence that was stored inside of the locked and secured DNA vault. The first thing I had to do was to enter into the larger package of evidence, which is itemized as Exhibit 01, which is a large ground box. Inside of this box, I had to retrieve the right buccal swabs and left buccal swabs from Athena and Horner in order to cut and retain those to be used as references.
And did you do...
After...
Sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
No, you're fine. Keep up. Okay. After I had cut Exhibit 01AA, which is right buccal swab 1 from Athena and Horner, I retained the right buccal swab 2, left buccal swab 1, and left buccal swab 2, as well as Exhibit 0112AA, which was the blood card from the victim. I cut a portion of the blood card for DNA analysis to be used as a reference for the victim, and I retained the remainder of that blood card. After those known samples were cut and retained, I then was able to enter into the sexual assault kit from Athena Monroe Strand and start my analysis for this male screening procedure.
And what is entailed with doing the male screening procedure with regard to those items?
So the male screening procedure is a procedure that I believe now it's phased out of the lab, so DPS does not do this analysis anymore. But it is a rough estimate of how much total human DNA and male DNA is present on items of evidence from a sexual assault kit. So it allows us to very quickly get an estimate and a determination of which swabs, specifically inside a sexual assault kit, would be eligible and beneficial for further DNA testing.
And with regard to the sexual assault kit from the body of Athena Monroe Strand, did you do that analysis?
Yes, I did.
And explain how that analysis was conducted, please.
So upon opening the sexual assault kit, I itemized the 3 swabs that were present inside, or the 3 sets of swabs. There were vaginal swabs, which are itemized as Exhibit 0201. Exhibit 0202 are anal swabs from Athena Monroe Strand, and Exhibit 0203 are the oral swabs from Athena Monroe Strand.
And
So in order to
go ahead.
In order to start the analysis for this DNA male screening procedure, I opened up each swab box that was labeled properly with the case number for the case, my initials, and the date of examination, and a small portion from the tips of the swabs were cut and placed into a labeled tube that would then be placed on a barcoded plate and used for the lab analytical side of the DNA male screening procedure.
May I ask you a follow-up question on that?
Yes.
I want to talk about the swabs from the defendant, the blood card, and then these 3 swabs from the sexual assault kit. When you cut those, do you cut the entire item up, or is there part of it that's still retained for further testing if needed?
When a swab is cut, so a buccal swab from the suspect, when that is cut, only half of one swab is used for that DNA analysis. That leaves the remainder of that one swab for any future testing, as well as the other 3 buccal swabs from the defendant.
Okay. What about with the blood card from Athena
Yes.
Strand?
With the blood card specifically, the blood card had 4 spots of red-brown staining that was taken from the ME blood standard. I only cut a 5 millimeter by 5 millimeter section for DNA analysis, and the entire rest of that card is retained frozen for any future analysis.
And now with regard to the 3 swabs from the sexual assault kit,
Mm-hmm.
is that the same?
So exhibit
Sorry, I cut you off.
It's okay. Exhibit 0201, which are the vaginal swabs, there were 2 cotton swabs inside of the closed swab box. So from those 2 cotton swabs, the swab tips were cut and placed into a tube for male screening. That is the same for Exhibit 0202, the anal swabs, and Exhibit 0203, the oral swabs. So I would estimate about 80% of these swabs are left for any future testing. We only take maybe a 15 to 20% of the swab from the very tip of the cotton swab for male screening.
Understood. So go forward from that point. Now you've cut the tips of the swabs. Tell us what you do next.
So after the swab tips are cut, they are placed into a labeled tube and put on a labeled plate as well. Another analyst can then take this plate with the samples inside, and they will add the different chemicals needed during this male screening procedure. So male screening, or a rough definition, the procedure is where we will add chemicals that will extract any cells present in the sample to release DNA from inside of those cells or other cellular debris. Once the DNA is in solution, more chemicals are added to those samples and moved to other instruments to start what is called this quantification process. And that is where we will get the data for male screening for my report as well, where it will let us know how much total human DNA is present in the sample, as well as how much male DNA in along with it. It will also let us know if there are any quality indicators associated with the data, or if there is anything that needs to be looked into further. For this report, there was no quality indication errors associated with the data, and I had normal results for all three of these swabs.
So with regard to the results themselves, are those listed on your lab report that we previously identified as State's Exhibit number 298?
Yes.
Now, before I offer that into evidence, I want to talk to you about State's Exhibit 297, the lab submission. When you went to retrieve these items originally and opened the box, did you just get the things that you immediately needed out, or did you take some steps with regard to the other items as well?
So in order to retrieve the buccal swabs from the suspect as well as the known blood card from the victim, I had to itemize and take note of the rest of the items of packaging and evidence that were inside of Exhibit 01, which is the large brown box. So a portion of my notes for this male screening lab report included notes describing the packaging details and labeling on these other items of evidence that were inside of Exhibit 01.
And for those items, other than the ones that we've already talked about, what did you list with regard to those items?
All of those items are reported as this item was not examined on my report.
Okay. So we can look at just, this report really just pertains to the buccal swabs from Athena and Horner, the blood card from Athena Strand, and then the 3 sets of swabs from the sexual assault kit. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So now I'm going to ask it, when you itemize those reports, or those itemize those items, including the ones that said this item not examined, was that from the items that were listed on the lab report that you previously identified as State's Exhibit number 297?
Those other items are, they are itemized, I think, further on the later biology laboratory report. These are just itemized so that they are given an item number and I can label the items of evidence inside while I retrieved the other swab.
All right, thank you. Now, let's talk, I'm going to go ahead and offer into evidence, Your Honor, at this time, State's Exhibit number 297, which is the lab submission report, and State's Exhibit number 298, which is the DNA male screening laboratory report.
I have no additional objections on it.
All right.
State's Exhibits 297 and 298, is that correct, Mr. Berry?
Yes, sir.
Are admitted.
Now, Ms. Ferrara, with regard to the lab reports themselves, would your name be listed as Winston rather than Ferrara?
Yes, on this DNA mail screening lab report, my name is listed as Jacqueline Winston.
And then, so on this report, now that we have it admitted into evidence, I'd like you to tell us what the results were, first of all, from the vaginal swabs from Athena Monroe Strand.
Exhibit 0201, vaginal swabs from Athena Monroe Strand. The report indicates that male DNA was detected on this item utilizing the Plexer HY quantification system. This item was collected and retained.
And can you explain a little further what the Plexor HY quantification kit or system is?
The Plexer HY quantification kit is just a box that contains all of the chemicals that we use during this male screening lab procedure.
Now, with regard to the anal swabs from Athena Monroe Strand, what were your findings for the anal swabs?
Exhibit 0202, anal swabs from Athena Monroe Strand. Male DNA was detected on this item utilizing the Plexer HY quantification kit. Due to the presence of high amounts of total DNA relative to the amount of male DNA present, the sample was not processed for autosomal STR analysis. Trace evidence was collected. The collected trace evidence has been packaged with the evidence. No further trace analysis was conducted at this time.
So for vaginal swabs 0201, male DNA was detected, correct?
Correct.
And for anal swabs 0202, male DNA was detected as well.
Male DNA was detected, yes.
Now, with regard to 0203, the oral swabs from Athena Monroe Strand, can you tell the jury what your finding was with regard to those items?
The results from the report for Exhibit 0203, oral swabs from Athena Monroe Strand, was that the detection of male DNA on this item was inconclusive utilizing the Plexer HY quantification kit due to the low male quantification value.
Now, does that absolutely mean that those items cannot be further tested?
No. Any items that are positive for male DNA or are inconclusive, like the oral swabs, they are retained, frozen, and can be definitely used for further DNA testing downstream.
Now, that didn't and wouldn't have involved you in that process, correct?
Correct. I did not proceed along with the DNA analysis for those samples. That was another analyst who performed that work.
Now let's talk about the itemization of these other things that were taken out. And is that documented in what has been marked and referred to so far as State's Exhibit number 300, the biology lab report issued on June 14, 2023?
Yes, that biology lab report has more information for all the other items that were itemized from inside of that large brown box.
And when you itemize these, do you also not only say what they are, but where they were recovered from, if possible?
In the names for some of these items, I will use the information that was provided to the lab via the lab submission form. I also note in my own personal lab notes that any labeling that was present on the packaging that could also help us indicate any other details such as location where the item could be found.
Your Honor, at this time, I will offer into evidence State's Exhibit number 300. biology laboratory report?
No additional things.
State's Exhibits 300 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, with regard to this lab report, I just want to kind of walk through each item and what you did and what your findings were. So let's talk in general sense. When you encounter these items, does your action depend upon what that item is, or is it the same for each item? Can you kind of explain that?
Yes. So when I was performing this forensic biology screening on these items, for clothing items, there is usually the same kind of screening procedure that we will follow. If there are other items that are not typically standard, then those can be screened and approached in a different manner. For the most part of this evidence, they were articles of clothing. So for every article of clothing, they are first tape lifted. And a tape lift is just a method to collect any trace evidence that may be present on the article of clothing. So tape is used all over that article of clothing to collect any trace evidence that's present, and then those are sealed and properly packaged in another envelope in case additional trace analysis is preferred and performed later on to that item. After trace analysis is performed, if an article of clothing is needed to be tested for semen, which was the case for this evidence, then all the articles of clothing were viewed using an alternate light source to hopefully identify any possible stains that we should test for semen. Any ALS positive stains were noted and tested using a semen presumptive test, as well as...
Hold on for a second. May I stop you and ask you to explain what you mean by, I think you said ALS positive, is that right? Can you explain that?
Yes. So ALS positive refers to an alternate light source. So we use an alternate light source. The wavelength, I believe, at the lab is 455 nanometers. You've probably seen it in crime shows where they'll use something like a black light to hopefully identify bodily fluids or other stains. So we use a specific wavelength in the lab to hopefully identify any stains that could be tested for semen or other bodily fluids.
All right, so then I stopped you. So once you've done that, what's the next step?
So any ALS positive stains that fluoresce would be tested with a presumptive semen test. If the presumptive semen test was positive, then I would move on to a confirmatory semen test, which would be to actually make a slide and try to visualize sperm cells for that sample. Aside from semen testing, the article of clothing is also visually examined to identify any possible blood stains as well on the item. So if any blood stains are visualized, or any possible blood stains are visualized, they are also tested with a presumptive blood test as well. Any positive stains would be collected and noted and retained for any future DNA testing, along with any positive semen stains as well from that article of clothing.
And before we talk about the results on the individual items, when you say that a positive stain would be retained, how would that be retained?
So that would depend on the size of the stain as well as the thickness or density of stain. So if any stain reacted positive to a presumptive blood test, that would be cut out from an article of clothing if it is in a size that would fit inside of the baggies we use at the lab that would fit in the freezer. It would be cut. If the stain is too large, then a portion of that stain would be cut out from the article of clothing, and then the remainder of the stain would remain on that item of evidence, which would still be secured in the locked vault after testing was performed.
So let's talk about your findings. So item O1, you said was what?
It is a large brown box that was submitted to the lab.
And what is item O1, O2?
Exhibit 102 is itemized as the FedEx Polo from suspect's property.
And was the presumptive testing done on this?
Yes, presumptive testing for the presence of blood was performed, as well as testing for semen that included presumptive testing as well as an actual sperm search.
And can you explain the findings?
Presumptive testing for the presence of blood was positive. Semen was detected. Trace evidence was detected or collected, The collected trace evidence has been packaged with the evidence. No further trace analysis was conducted at this time. And then I reported that samples were collected and retained for possible DNA analysis.
With regard to the semen, if it had just been a presumptive positive, but actual semen had not been located, how would it have been notated in your report?
It would have been notated similarly to the presumptive blood result. It would have said that presumptive testing for the presence of semen was positive, but no spermatozoa was detected.
But in this case, what did it list regarding the semen?
It said that semen was detected.
Now let's talk about O1, O3. What was that?
Exhibit 0103 is itemized as the gray sweatshirt from suspect's property.
And let's just talk about, without regard to the trace evidence or whether you kind of generally told us what would happen with all the samples based upon what you found. So let's just talk about the findings related to blood and the findings related to semen on these items as we go through them. So O103, the gray sweatshirt from the suspect's property.
Presumptive testing for the presence of blood was negative. Semen was detected.
O104, a multicolored sock from the suspect's property.
No stains having the appearance of blood were observed. Presumptive testing for the presence of semen was negative. There is an additional reporting statement on here too. It says that swabs were collected from this item and retained for potential DNA analysis. That is another type of analysis that we can perform on clothing in addition to the presumptive test that I have noted on previously. I collected swabs from this article of clothing, this multicolored sock, to hopefully collect any potential skin cells that could indicate who that sock possibly belonged to. So in this case, in addition to tape lifting the sock, looking for any positive ALS stains to test for semen and presumptive blood tests, that item was also swabbed and the swabs were retained for any potential further DNA analysis.
All right, next, the O105, the white and green Hanes underwear from the suspects, found on the suspect's property.
Presumptive testing for the presence of blood was negative. Presumptive testing for the presence of semen was negative. And swabs were collected from this item and retained for potential DNA analysis.
All right, now O106, is that one item or multiple items?
0106 is one item. It is a medium brown paper bag, but inside of that brown paper bag, there were two items inside.
The first one is listed as O106-AA, is that correct?
Correct.
And what was that?
That is itemized as blue jeans from suspect's property.
And, what was the findings on that?
Presumptive testing for the presence of blood was positive. Presumptive testing for the presence of semen was negative. Samples were collected and retained for possible DNA analysis.
And 0106 AD, the second item from 0106?
It is itemized as a multicolored sock from suspect's property. No stains having the appearance of blood were observed. Presumptive testing for the presence of semen was negative. Swabs were collected from this item and retained for potential DNA analysis.
And I think I'm gonna just go over the rest, any items where you have positive findings, other than to just name them what they are. So the next item, 0107, the FedEx Polo from Tanner Lynn Horner, were there any findings, positive related to that?
No.
0108, black and gray socks from Tanner Lynn Horner.
No.
0109, jeans from Tanner Lynn Horner.
Yes.
Can you explain what the findings were with regard to those jeans labeled as 0109?
Presumptive testing for the presence of blood was positive and semen was detected.
And what was done as far as collecting samples from that item, the jeans?
Those samples that were positive were collected and retained for possible DNA analysis.
And is it, are there multiple samples that can be collected from the same item, potentially?
Yes.
Explain that, please.
So according to the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab's policy regarding death penalty cases and capital murder cases, every positive sample that can be used for further DNA testing has to be collected and retained. In other cases, not every single positive stain would maybe be retained and sent for DNA analysis, but DPS has a specific and different policy for these types of cases. So every single positive sample and positive stain that was identified and collected from these items of evidence were stored frozen, and I believe, you would have to confirm with the DNA analyst, but I believe they were all additionally sent forward for DNA testing.
All right, thank you. Now let's talk about item number 01-10. What was that, and what was the result?
Exhibit 0110 were black Hanes underwear from Tanner Lynn Horner. Presumptive testing for the presence of blood was negative. Semen was detected. Samples were collected and retained for possible DNA analysis.
All right, let's go on to 0112 AB and AC. What were those?
0112 AB were right hand fingernail clippings and clipper from Athena Presley Monroe Strand. And exhibit 0112 AC were the left hand fingernail clippings from Athena Presley Monroe Strand.
And were swabs collected and retained for DNA analysis on both of those items?
Correct. Those swabs were also presumptively tested for the presence of blood.
And was one of them positive for the presence of blood?
Yes. Exhibit 0112 AB, the right hand fingernail clippings and clipper were presumptively tested and they were positive for the presence of blood.
What about the other swab? I mean, the other hand?
Exhibit 0112 AC from the left hand, the presumptive testing for the presence of blood was negative.
But as you said, the swabs were still collected and retained and sent forward. Is that right?
Correct.
All right.
So these were fingernail clippings from the ME's office. So they were sent the actual clippings from the victim. So these clippings themselves were retained, frozen and stored, and the actual swabbings that I personally took inside the lab from these clippings were also retained, frozen, and stored.
Or let's talk about 0113. I believe that's green bungee cords from truck. Is that right?
Yes.
And we don't have this in front of us right now, but in your lab notes, do you often take pictures and show the items where if you collect swabs, where you collected the swabs from?
Yes, I do.
And are there sometimes different swabs that are collected, say, from the end of the set of bungee cords versus the middle of the set of bungee cords?
Yes. It sometimes depends on the case and the suspected way in which the evidence could have been used. But yes, in this case, I took photos and detailed notes to describe where and why I had swabbed that specific item differently.
Now, what was the findings as far as the presumptive test for that item, 0113?
Presumptive testing for the presence of blood was negative, and swabs were collected from the item and retained for potential DNA analysis.
What about 0114, the black bungee cords from the truck?
No stains having the appearance of blood were observed.
Were swabs nonetheless collected?
Yes.
And let's go on to 0115. 0115, I believe, has ten different items associated with 0115. Is that right?
Yes.
And all of those are taken from where?
According to the information on the submission form, those are all swabs that were collected from inside of the truck.
Okay. And does it state, I'm not going to have you read it, but does it state for each of those swabs where those swabs came from within the truck?
Yes, there is a general location for where those swabs were collected.
And on any of those, was a presumptive testing for blood or semen positive on any of those swabs?
No, they were all negative for blood and semen.
But nonetheless, were those swabs still sent forward for further testing?
They were all collected and retained. You can confirm with the DNA analyst if they were for sure sent forward for DNA testing, as that had occurred after I left the lab. But it is the policy that those would have been sent forward for DNA testing.
And then finally, I think there was just a folded piece of toilet paper that was collected as 0116. Did you do the same testing procedures on that?
Yes, I presumptively tested for blood and semen, and they were both negative.
Now, as part of your duties with, well, let me ask you this first. Ms. Ferrara, did you leave, what was the reason you left the DPSR in the crime lab?
I had just delivered my daughter, and my husband and I made a personal decision that I would stay home with her instead and resign.
Okay. And how old is your daughter now?
18 months.
And y'all live in Texas, or do you live in a different state?
We relocated to Kansas.
And is that why you're testifying by Zoom today?
Yes, that's part of the reason.
Okay. Now, with regard to your further duties on this case, were you asked to put together or involved in putting together a list of items that might potentially be depleted with further testing?
Yes, I did.
And what was the purpose of
At the end of my biological testing, I had put together a list for the agents working on the case of any items that had positive samples that could be used for DNA analysis, and of those samples, which samples would potentially be depleted during said DNA analysis. This was so that the agents in charge could potentially get a court order for any DNA testing where samples would be depleted, as that is required by DPS policy.
And so, because of this policy with DPS, the court has to issue a specific order to further test those items, is that right?
Yes.
And, part of the reason why death penalty cases take longer is to comply with this, requirement so that you can, get agreements from the parties if possible, or at least have the court look over and determine where that testing should take place, correct?
I think, you know, let's go.
Correct.
Sustain. Jury will disregard the last answer.
Ms. Ferrara, I want to thank you for your time and your work on this case, and I will pass the witness room.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Hello, Ms. Ferrara, good to see you again. So.
Yes,
just
hi.
a Couple of quick questions. You were not the person who collected the swabs, right?
Are you referring to the swabs from the truck?
Well, any of these, you weren't out doing the collecting, these came to you, right?
Correct. Any evidence that was submitted to the lab that were swabs, I did not collect it. I had taken swabs from certain items of evidence as part of my own testing, and those were collected by me and retained frozen.
Yes, and some of these things were stains and things like that. You don't have any way of knowing how old the stain is, right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last bit?
I said you wouldn't have any way of knowing how old the stain is on the items you received.
Correct. I cannot determine the age of a stain.
And it's the same for any DNA on that item. You would have no way of knowing when it was deposited on the item.
Correct.
Now, it's a little confusing when you're talking about the quantification kit. That's not to calculate how much DNA is present, is it?
So the Plexer HY quantification kit that I mentioned for the DNA male screening lab report, that estimates a total human DNA, so autosomal DNA, as well as total male DNA present in those swabs from the sexual assault kit.
Okay, so if there are calculations in the bench notes as to that number, that would have been you that calculated it or someone else?
The number that we get for the quantification values for the male screening lab report, that is calculated through a software that we use in combination with the Plexer HY quantification chemicals for that process. So it is an estimate. It is not an exact, precise calculation, but it is a very close, rough estimate of how much total human DNA is present in that sample and how much male DNA is present as well. It's just to give us a good guide on which samples would be beneficial for any further future DNA testing.
Okay, and can you clarify when you're talking about the presumptive testing for semen, and you also mentioned viewing it under a microscope for spermatozoa. That's, you have your presumptive testing, but then to actually follow up on that, you have to do the microscopic viewing, correct?
Yes, the DPS policy for testing for semen and sperm cells are to go ahead and perform what's called a sperm search using microscopic slide with a portion of the sample. So that is only performed on samples that are positive, presumptively positive for semen. That would be the next step in that case to confirm whether that stain is actually semen or not.
And is that step done at the stage you were working on, or was that farther down the process?
That was part of my procedure in the lab.
Okay. I'll pass away, Sean.
Redirect.
No further questions, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused.
Yes, Sean.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, ma'am. We appreciate it.